This event occurred on the night of my 13th birthday, December of 2011. We lived in a densely wooded area of Richmond Furnace, Pennsylvania, on the top of a winding mountain trail, barely big enough for a mid-sized car to fit on. The only street light on the mountain was installed when my parents bought the land and built their house back in the early 90s. They owned about 3 acres of land. Roughly 1 was where our house, the front yard, and the backyard sat, and the rest was just woods. My parents had gone out that night with my younger 2 brothers. They were doing some early Christmas shopping, and I'd wanted to stay home. They agreed, since it was my birthday, and they figured I'd be fine for a few hours on my own at the house. It was normal enough. Started to get dark around 5-ish, and I put a movie on in the living room to watch. Our living room had these large bay windows that faced the front yard, and another set that faced the backyard, a clear view straight through the living room. Around 6 p.m., I started hearing these little taps on the window that faced the front yard, but I thought it was just the trees and the wind, so I ignored it. Well, the taps became more frantic and more forceful as time went on. Finally, I got up and I went over to the window. There, pressed right up against the glass, I mean smashed against the glass, was a face. Not a normal-looking person peeping or something like that. I mean, this looked like something out of one of those old folk tales. It was paler than the frost outside. The eyes were this horrible black color, and it was smiling, grinning. That grin was stretched so wide, I've never seen anyone be able to stretch their mouth like that. We stared at one another for a while. It honestly felt like another hour passed while I was just locked up staring at this thing. Finally, I ran for the front door to check the locks. It ran with me.
Duh!
Thankfully, the front door was already deadbolted, so I ran to the back door and it took off after me. I could see it through the windows. I got to that door barely a second before it did and deadbolted it. The thing started screaming and beating on the back door like it was throwing all of its weight against it. I fell on the floor at some point, so I was trying to scoop back and just watch the door. It was bowing under the weight. I thought it was going to snap in half. The screaming was just awful and unnatural sounding, and it was so loud, no person could have been screaming that loudly. Finally, I got it together and ran for the house phone in the dining room, again by the big bay windows. And while I dialed 911, that thing came back around the front, and it saw me on the phone and started throwing itself against the window, pounding on it, screaming and screeching. The 911 operator could barely even hear me. I was crying and just told them to get here as fast as they could. The phone fell on the floor, and I was just crying with my hands held over my ears, watching it pound away on the glass and smashing its face against it again and again. I don't know how it didn't shatter. The whole house felt like it was shaking. The state police were about 45 minutes away, so I knew nobody was going to get here very soon. I just prayed the glass would hold on as long as it could. It must have heard the sirens from down the mountain, and it took off running a little before the lights were visible through the trees. They had to break the door down because I couldn't make myself get up off the floor. I still had my hands over my ears. They eventually got me calmed down enough that I could tell them what happened. I knew they didn't believe me. At least, maybe they thought it was just some intruder, and my fear turned that intruder into a monster. By the time my parents came home, they found that the screens in all of our bedroom windows had been shredded. Not cut, like with a knife or a box cutter, but shredded like an animal had gone after them. My mother's flower beds had been destroyed, and there was blood and urine in them. The gouges on the back door were so deep that they asked me if maybe it had been a bear. They couldn't find fingerprints or human footprints, though.